Jimin cried when asked about Jungkook. His answer left everyone speechless. "I should have stopped him. I should have known," Jimin whispered, his voice cracking as millions watched in stunned silence, the microphone trembling in his hand. The lights of the studio were blinding, yet the world outside felt darker than ever. Cameras rolled, fans held their breath, and Jimin, usually composed, always graceful, sat frozen. It was the anniversary interview, the one meant to commemorate a decade of memories. But the moment the interviewer mentioned Jungkook's name, everything shifted. Jimin's fingers curled tightly on the edge of the velvet seat, nails digging into the fabric as if anchoring him to the present. For a second, he didn't speak. The tension hung in the air like smoke, unspoken, suffocating. The audience didn't move. Even the cameramen stopped breathing. And then he cried. Not the elegant kind of crying reserved for soft ballads or emotional encores. This was raw. It was the cry of someone who had held something in for far too long, like a dam bursting under pressure no one else could see. His shoulders trembled, and his gaze drifted downward into something far away, somewhere no one could follow. The interviewer stammered an apology, but Jimin waved it off. "No," he croaked, eyes glistening under the harsh lights. "They need to know." 3 years had passed since the night Jungkook vanished without explanation. One final message sent only to Jimin. "Don't trust them. I'll find the truth even if it destroys me." And then silence. No calls, no texts, no sightings. Jungkook had simply disappeared like smoke in the rain. The fans were told he needed time. The label fed scripted press releases. Even the remaining members played along, bound by non-disclosure agreements and threats heavier than words. But Jimin had never accepted it. He'd never believed the silence was voluntary. After the group's final world tour, Jimin withdrew from public life. He left Seoul. He left music. Rumors swirled, rehab, heartbreak, creative burnout. But no one knew the truth, not even his family. What they didn't know was that he had been searching, following a trail of half-truths, encrypted messages, and broken memories. Now, 3 years later, Jimin was back, and with him came stories too strange to ignore. "Jungkook, he didn't run away," Jimin said, his voice steady now, every word chosen like a blade. "He was taken." The silence shattered, the host gasped. Producers glanced at one another in panic. The live feed lagged for a second, intentional, a glitch. Jimin didn't stop. "He found something," he continued. "Something buried beneath the fame, behind the closed doors of this industry. He told me he saw them watching, that someone inside was listening through our phones, tracking our movements." The memories surged back. The black car parked across the street every night. The anonymous letters slipped under hotel doors. The glitchy audio files Jungkook sent with muffled whispers and distorted screams. "Everyone thought he was paranoid," Jimin whispered, eyes glassy. "Even I doubted him until they came for me too." He leaned forward now, elbows on knees, every part of him trembling not from fear, but rage. "I was followed, threatened. My apartment was broken into, but they didn't take anything, just left symbols. The same ones Jungkook showed me, circles within circles, a mark of something older, something watching us from the beginning." The studio was silent, paralyzed by his words. The host tried to interject, but Jimin raised a hand. "There's more," he said. "Things I can't explain, rooms with no doors, people who don't cast reflections, places in our tour photos that change subtly, but they change." He believed they were rewriting us, not just our pasts, our minds. One of the producers cut the feed. The screen blinked black, but the internet was already ablaze. Clips surfaced, transcripts leaked, hashtags trended. Behind the scenes, Jimin stood slowly, wiped his face, and turned away from the lights. This was only the beginning. Because Jimin hadn't come back for sympathy. He had come back to finish what Jungkook started. And this time, he wasn't alone. "You're not supposed to be here, Jimin." The voice was sharp, familiar, and filled with warning. It belonged to Namjoon. He stood in the dark corridor of the building Jimin once called home. Big Hit's old studio, now abandoned, the windows boarded, the walls tagged by time and secrets. "I could say the same to you," Jimin replied, stepping out of the shadows. His breath formed ghosts in the cold air. I thought you left this behind. Namjoon didn't answer immediately. His gaze flickered to the heavy USB drive in Jimin's hand, the one Jimin had stolen only hours ago, from a security archive buried beneath the company's old Seoul data center. It wasn't just old footage. It was the original surveillance video from the night Jungkook disappeared. Footage that was supposedly destroyed. You don't know what you're getting into, Namjoon muttered. No, Jimin said. I finally do. They stared at each other, the tension between them sharp enough to draw blood. Once brothers. Now chess pieces on opposite sides of something neither of them had fully chosen. And yet, here they were, bound by the same shadow. Where, Yoongi? Jimin asked. Namjoon flinched. He's off-grid, vanished 2 months ago. Same symbols, same silence. Jimin's jaw tightened. Another one gone. They moved through the darkness together, not quite allies, not quite enemies, until they reached the old control room. Dust covered the consoles. The scent of mildew and stale electricity hung in the air, but the equipment still worked. Jimin knew he'd tested it last week, preparing for this moment. He slid in the USB and hit play. The screen flickered. June 17th, 2023, 2:13 a.m. Jungkook entered the studio lobby alone, hoodie up, phone to his ear. His expression was tense. He turned sharply at the sound of a voice, unheard in the footage, but Jimin remembered it. It was his voice. Wait for me, don't go in alone. Jungkook didn't listen. He moved down the hallway. A second figure appeared behind him, blurry, pixelated. The security camera glitched, skipping frames. And then Jungkook stopped, turned, and smiled. The figure stepped closer, still unrecognizable, but something about the shape, the shoulders, the walk was wrong, too smooth, too symmetrical, like a mask pretending to be human. Pause it, Namjoon whispered. Jimin obeyed. The screen showed Jungkook reaching for the stranger's hand, willingly, calmly. Why would he smile? Jimin asked. He said they were coming for him, that he was scared. Namjoon was silent. Unless, Jimin's voice dropped, he thought it was someone he knew. He rewound the footage, slowed it, and this time, just before the figure appeared, a frame glitched with static. An image flickered, barely visible. But there, Jimin leaned in. It was Taehyung's face. Only it was. The eyes were wrong, dead, too wide like someone who had forgotten how to blink, and on the wall behind him, the same spiral symbol, carved in blood. Jimin stumbled back. No, Taehyung would never. We don't know what it is anymore, Namjoon said coldly. We only know it's been using us, feeding off us, since the beginning. Jimin shook his head, overwhelmed. You knew, and you let me think I was crazy. I tried to protect you, Namjoon snapped. But you were obsessed, you wouldn't stop. Because he was my best friend, Jimin growled. Because I saw the fear in his eyes, because I felt the change. Then listen to me now, Namjoon said, voice trembling. Whatever took Jungkook, it's not done. Outside, sirens wailed. Red and blue lights flickered through the cracked windows. They were too late. They found us, Namjoon said. Jimin grabbed the USB. Not before I find him. They fled into the night, chased by shadows and secrets. Hours later, hidden in a nameless motel on the outskirts of Busan, Jimin watched the footage again, frame by frame, analyzing Jungkook's body language, the faint twitch in his fingers, the last glance toward the camera. And then it hit him. Jungkook had been signaling. A code Morse, 3 short blinks, SOS. He wasn't smiling, he was warning. And he hadn't been taken. He had let himself be taken. Because he had a plan. Jimin's hands trembled as he looked at the final frame. Jungkook's mouth moved, one silent word just before the footage ended. Run. But Jimin wouldn't run anymore. He would follow the spiral, all the way into the dark. And bring Jungkook back, or be lost with him. I saw him, Jimin. He was standing outside my window last night. The voice on the phone was hoarse, nearly broken. It belonged to Jin. Jimin pressed the receiver harder to his ear, heart pounding in his chest. That's impossible. Taehyung's been off the grid for almost a year. He hasn't posted, called nothing. I know what I saw, Jin cut in sharp. It was him, or something that looked exactly like him. He didn't move, just stood there in the rain, staring up. Same coat, same eyes, but they were hollow, like he'd forgotten how to be human. Jimin swallowed hard. The motel room around him felt smaller with each breath. The USB drive sat beside the cracked laptop screen, paused at the last frame of Jungkook's silent warning. The word run still burned behind Jimin's eyes, echoing with unbearable clarity. Where are you now? He asked. Gone, Jin whispered. I'm not at home anymore. I didn't pack. I didn't lock the door. I just ran. Like I did after Hybe started making us sign those wellness contracts. Like I did the night they told us Taehyung had gone overseas for spiritual retreat. We all knew it was bullshit, Jimin. You just weren't ready to hear it. Silence fell. Jimin closed his eyes, fists clenched. I'm ready now. Jin exhaled on the other end of the line, a sound so full of weariness it vibrated with age. Then you need to come to Daegu. There's something you have to see. 3 hours later, Jimin stood at the edge of an abandoned psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of the city. The building loomed like a dying relic, its windows shattered, the paint flacking off in long gray strips. Graffiti bled down the walls like wounds, but beneath the layers of ink and decay, Jimin saw them. The spirals, endless spirals. Jin emerged from the shadows beside the gate, older now, skinnier, haunted. You're lucky I got here before you, he said. There are cameras inside, motion sensors. Some of them still work, not from the city. These are newer, wired into something else. Something private. Private-like, Hybe, Jimin asked. Jin didn't respond. He just nodded once and led the way inside. The darkness swallowed them immediately. The air was thick with mildew and something else, something metallic, like old blood and copper wires. As they moved through the crumbling halls, Jimin saw faded murals on the walls. Images of children with no eyes, mouths sewn shut, hands raised in prayer or fear, he couldn't tell which. What is this place? He asked. Jin turned his flashlight toward a plaque, half buried beneath rubble. Department of Cognitive Reprogramming and Identity Suppression. Closed 1993. The program was illegal, Jin said. Even back then, they experimented on artists, actors, idols, people who were too famous, too influential. They said it was for safety, but it was control. Absolute control, emotional resets, memory fragmentation, identity erasure. Jimin's voice trembled. Why here, why us? Because the system evolved. The technology didn't die, it adapted. They began embedding it in our lives, in our tour, in our rest periods, in the music. They figured out how to rewire the human mind through repeated sonic patterns, exposure to specific frequencies, rhythmic triggers, sound as a scalpel. Jimin's knees went weak. You're saying everything we did, everything we made was part of it. Jin turned, eyes hollow. I'm saying we were the test. A crash echoed down the hallway. Both men froze. Footsteps fast, light. Jimin's heart thudded. His instincts screamed. But his body moved toward the sound, toward the unknown, toward the chance, however small, that it could be him. He burst into the corridor, flashlight slicing the dark. And there he was. Taehyung. Soaked in rain, still, silent. Taehyung, Jimin whispered, stepping closer. Is it really you? Taehyung tilted his head, smiled, but it wasn't his smile, it was too symmetrical, too slow. Don't, Jin hissed. Don't touch him. Jimin ignored him, stepping closer, his voice cracked. You left us, you left me. Why? Taehyung blinked slowly. I never left, I was always here. I just became what they needed. Then his expression shifted, mouth twitching into a snarl, muscles twitching unnaturally. The flashlight flickered. The temperature dropped. And from the corner behind him, another Taehyung stepped forward. Identical. Same face. Same body. But a flicker of fear in his eyes. The real one. Run, the second Taehyung gasped, blood on his lips. He's not me, they made him from me. The first Taehyung lunged. Jimin and Jin ran. Down the corridor, past broken beds and shattered mirrors, through a fire exit that screamed with rust and years of dust. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. They didn't stop until they reached the car, until the clone's scream faded behind them. In the rearview mirror, the second Taehyung collapsed to the ground, reaching out with shaking hands, mouthing one final plea. Find Jungkook before they finish what they started. And for the first time, Jimin believed he might be too late. You still think this is about Jungkook? Jin's voice was sharp, trembling, as the rain pelted the windshield like bullets. You think you're just saving a friend? You have no idea what you've stepped into, Jimin. The car roared down the highway, tires slick on the wet asphalt, the night pressing in from all sides. Taehyung, the real one, was unconscious in the backseat, his face pale, lips cracked, dried blood marking his chin and the collar of his torn hoodie. The other Taehyung, the imposter, was still in that cursed building, or whatever was left of him. Jin hadn't spoken since they sped away from the asylum until now. Jimin's grip on the wheel tightened. I don't care if it's bigger. I don't care if I die in the middle of it. I will not leave Jungkook behind. You think you're noble? Jin spat. You're stubborn, reckless. You didn't listen when we told you to stop 3 years ago. Jungkook begged you not to come looking, and now you've dragged me back in, him back in. I didn't drag anyone, Jimin snapped. He was already gone before I moved, before I could stop it. You all let him vanish. You think I slept at night after that? Jin's voice cracked. Do you think I forgave myself? The silence that followed was thicker than the storm outside. Jimin didn't reply. He couldn't. Taehyung stirred in the backseat, groaning softly. Jimin swerved the car off the road and parked beside a deserted warehouse just outside Gwangmyeong. Jin helped pull Taehyung inside, where they built a makeshift camp beneath flickering industrial lights. The place reeked of oil, rust, and mold, but it was hidden. They laid Taehyung down on a pile of dusty blankets. His eyes fluttered open. Mirror room, he croaked. Jimin knelt beside him. What mirror? Taehyung's pupils shook, his body convulsing slightly as if remembering caused physical pain. Underground, beneath Hybe's third compound, the one they said they demolished. They didn't. They just buried it. That's where they split me. Jin's eyes widened. Split. Taehyung grabbed Jimin's sleeve, nails digging in. You don't understand. They made copies, not just of me, of all of us. Jimin's breath caught. What do you mean copies? Not clones, refractions, versions of us that could be controlled, projected, manipulated, grown in silence, fed with memories. They used those rooms' endless reflections to break down the original identity until the real person forgot who they were. Then the copy became louder than the real. Jin stepped back, horrified. How would they even do that? Through us, Taehyung rasped. Through everything we made, our songs, our videos, we were templates. Jimin stared at him, heart thudding in his ears. So the one who took Jungkook wasn't someone else, Taehyung finished, his voice now a whisper. It was a version of you. The silence split the air like lightning. Jimin stood slowly, the world tilting. That's not possible. You had dreams, didn't you? Taehyung asked. Nightmares that didn't feel like nightmares, memories that weren't yours, things you did but didn't do. That's because the mirror remembers. It leaks. The more time passes, the thinner the line becomes between who you are and who they want you to be. I'm real, Jimin whispered, as if trying to convince himself. Are you? Jin asked quietly. Jimin turned on him, fury boiling. Don't you dare question me. I'm not. I'm asking you to look at the truth. If they've been watching us since the beginning, then how much of our real selves were ever ours to begin with? Taehyung pulled something from his jacket, a small, cracked glass shard, wrapped in cloth. This came from the mirror room. It's part of the original prototype system. If you look into it long enough, it shows you your other self. Jimin took it hesitantly. He stared into it. At first, it was nothing. Just his own reflection, tired, worn, frightened. But then, something moved. His reflection smiled before he did. The eyes blinked out of sync. Then, suddenly, his reflection leaned forward, closer to the glass, and mouthed something he couldn't hear. He dropped it. "Did you see it?" Taehyung asked. Jimin nodded slowly. "It's already started," Jin murmured. "They've already begun eroding the boundaries, and Jungkook." Jimin stood abruptly. "We go to the compound, now." Jin blocked him. "That place is a fortress. There are people in there who aren't people anymore. If you walk in without a plan, you'll never walk out." "We don't need a plan," Jimin growled. "We need the truth." That night they slept in shifts, weapons close, dreams filled with static and whispers. In the dead silence of 3:12 a.m., Jimin awoke with a gasp. There, at the end of the hallway, he stood. Jimin. But not him. The other self, grinning. Mouth moving again. This time, Jimin understood. "You'll break before you save him." And then the figure vanished, melted into the shadows. Jimin didn't sleep again. In the morning, they left for the compound. And for the first time in 3 years, Jimin wasn't chasing the past. He was chasing himself. The wind howled like a warning across the barren hills, sweeping ash and dust over the cracked road that led to what was once Hybe's forgotten third facility. The world knew it only as a defunct training compound, demolished after the company downsized operations. But Jimin knew better now. Beneath those broken walls lay the mirror room, and maybe, just maybe, Jungkook. They arrived at dawn. Mist hung low, swallowing the surrounding trees in silence. The gate stood rusted but unbroken. No guards, no cameras, at least none that they could see. "This is a trap," Jin said under his breath, scanning the perimeter. "They want us here." "Then let's not disappoint them," Jimin replied, eyes locked forward. Taehyung, still weak, nodded faintly. He had said little since the night before, haunted by the thing that had worn his face. But his eyes, those were different now. Sharper, like someone who had crawled out of hell and remembered every inch of the way back. Inside the compound, the air changed. It was heavier, metallic. The walls were too clean, as if scrubbed recently. The hallways were lit faintly by flickering overhead lights, some swaying despite no wind. They walked slowly, deeper, past empty dorm rooms and training halls, until they reached a thick steel door at the end of a long corridor. A keypad blinked red. Jimin stared at it. "We need a code." "No," Taehyung said, stepping forward. "We need a memory." He placed his hand on the pad and whispered, "Still with you." A line from their old song, a phrase they used to say before going on stage. The keypad blinked green. The door hissed open. "Why would they program that into security?" Jin asked, stepping through. "Because we were always the key," Taehyung said softly. "We were never just the experiment. We were also the luck." The room inside was vast, circular, and lined with mirrors, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. But these weren't ordinary reflections. Each pane shimmered slightly, warping reality, distorting light like water. They pulsed, humming softly, in sync with the faint thrumming beneath the floor. Jimin stepped forward, eyes scanning the reflections. Each one showed something different. One reflected him as a child, crying in a practice room. Another showed him on stage, eyes wide, smile forced. Another, one that stopped his breath, showed him in a hospital gown, wires attached to his scalp, mouth open in a silent scream. Jin turned to a mirror showing himself performing at a fan meet, but in the background the fans had no faces, just static blurs. Their cheers were silent. "This isn't just memory," he muttered. "This is programming." "It's how they bend us," Taehyung said. "Every trauma, every insecurity, they loop it, reinforce it, until we crack. And then they rebuild us from the cracks." Jimin's hands trembled. He stepped in front of one mirror that showed Jungkook, older, scarred, sitting alone in a cold metal cell, rocking slightly, whispering to himself. "Is this now?" Jimin asked. "Is this real?" "We don't know," Taehyung said. "The mirror shows moments that want to be seen. It feeds on connection, guilt, memory." Jin stepped back, face pale. Then how do we find him? Suddenly, the mirrors shuddered. The room darkened. From the far wall, a hidden door creaked open. Jimin didn't hesitate. He ran. Down another corridor, then another. The walls grew colder, smoother, until they weren't walls anymore but mirrored glass. The hallway split into identical paths, infinite reflections. One step wrong and they'd be lost. Follow the song, Taehyung called behind him. He left us a path. Jimin closed his eyes. He listened. A note, faint, barely audible, a low hum, a vibration in his chest more than his ears. He moved toward it. And then, a scream. High, piercing. Jungkook. He broke into a run, slamming into a narrow corridor. At the end, a chamber, sealed, lit by a cold blue light. Inside, through a pane of reinforced glass, he saw him. Jungkook. Hair longer, eyes hollow, but unmistakably him. Jimin slammed on the door. Jungkook, it's me, I'm here. Jungkook blinked slowly, focused, and then smiled. Not the broken smile from the last footage. This one was real. You came, he mouthed. But before Jimin could respond, something moved behind him. A hiss of compressed air. Footsteps. And then, Namjoon. But not the Namjoon they knew. His skin too smooth, his eyes too calm. He moved like a puppet too perfectly pulled. Step away from the glass, he said, voice flat. Jin appeared beside Jimin, breath shallow. That's not him, it's one of them. Is it? Namjoon's head tilted. Or maybe this is the real me, and the version you mourned was just the mask you wanted. Jimin raised the metal rod he'd taken from the car. Let him go. Namjoon smiled, stepping aside. Go ahead, open the door. But understand this. What you find inside might not be what you left behind. They broke him, Jimin, over and over, until all that was left was a choice. Jimin's hand hovered over the control panel. Choice, he asked. He could have forgotten, could have joined us, peace, silence, but he didn't. He chose pain, he chose you, but pain corrupts. What he is now you can't predict. Jimin's voice shook. I don't care, he's mine. He slammed the release. The door opened with a hiss. And inside Jungkook stood. Real, alive. Eyes brimming with something between recognition and terror. Jimin, he said, voice raw, you shouldn't have come. The lights exploded. The compound shook. And from the shadows, more figures stepped forward, reflections come to life. They all wore his face. Jimin. 100 versions. All smiling. The humming filled the room like a low, inhuman chant, vibrating through Jimin's bones, rattling his breath in his throat. The air shimmered with a heat that wasn't natural. The Jimin lookalikes, each a mirror distorted in subtle, wrong ways, stepped forward in perfect synchronization. Some were smiling, too wide. Others were crying without blinking. One was laughing silently, eyes darting like trapped glass shards. Jimin pulled Jungkook behind him. Don't touch him, he growled. The chorus of other Jimins tilted their heads in eerie unison. Why, they all said at once, he belongs to all of us now. Jungkook flinched at the sound, his fingers curling into Jimin's jacket as if grounding himself. His voice was dry, barely a whisper. They copied everything, every emotion, every move, but they can't create one thing. Jimin turned his head slightly, still holding his stance. What? Doubt, Jungkook whispered. They don't know how to question themselves. It's how I stayed me. It's the only way you'll know which is really you. Suddenly, one of the fake Jimins screamed and lunged. Jimin swung the metal pipe from earlier in a sharp arc, catching it square in the temple. It shattered like glass, splinters of skin and circuitry bursting across the ground. Not blood, wires. God, Jin's voice cracked from the hallway behind. They're not just copies, they're manufactured, printed. The other Jimins began to advance faster now, no longer speaking in unison. Some shouted names, Jungkook, Namjoon, Taehyung. Others screamed confessions, like ghosts reliving lives they never lived. I let Hobei fall. I whispered the wrong lyrics on purpose. I hated being last. I wanted to leave in 2018. Jimin's ears rang with each phrase like a knife carving at his chest. They're trying to break you down, Taehyung hissed, dragging himself into the chamber, face pale, arm around the wall for balance. That's how the mirror works. It doesn't kill you. It replaces you by convincing you you're not worth keeping. Jimin stood taller, lifting his chin. Then let's remind them who I am. He reached down, grabbed a shard of the broken clone's faceplate. Holding it like a knife, he stepped into the circle of his own faces. They circled him, closed in, and then one stepped forward. This version of Jimin looked almost identical, down to the faint scar under his lip. But his eyes were wrong. Too calm, empty. What if I told you, the fake said, that Jungkook wanted this, that he begged us to erase him because he couldn't carry the guilt anymore? Jimin stepped forward slowly. What guilt? The fake smiled. He told me about the fire. Silence. Real silence. Jungkook's breath hitched behind him. You said it wasn't real, Jimin said slowly. Jungkook shook his head, eyes wide. I thought it was a dream. I thought I didn't mean for it to happen. Jin's voice trembled. What fire? Jungkook turned to him. Before the tour in Tokyo, I was alone. There was a power failure in the studio. One of the dancers was still inside. I lit a candle to stay calm. I thought it was out, but when I left... His voice cracked. Jimin moved to touch his arm, but he pulled away. I was afraid. They hushed it up, said it was an accident. I believed them. I needed to believe them. But that's when the messages started. Blackmail, symbols. I thought I was protecting all of you by leaving. Taehyung stepped closer, his voice low. You don't protect us by disappearing, Jungkook. You protect us by being with us, by fighting together. Jimin turned back to the fake. You used his guilt to bend him. You fed it to the mirror. The fake shrugged. Guilt makes the cleanest canvas. Then Jimin struck. The glass shard plunged into the fake's chest, not with fury, but with precision. The others lunged, and chaos exploded. Glass shattered. Screams rose like a storm. Taehyung tackled one of the reflections, smashing its head into the mirrored wall. Jin fought with a crowbar he'd found on the way in, swinging wild but effective. Jimin fought in silence, eyes cold, every move focused. One by one, the clones fell. Some sparked. Some bled black. Some simply stopped moving, collapsing like puppets whose strings had been cut. And then the room was still. Breathing heavy, wounds dripping, silence ringing. Jungkook slumped to the floor, hands in his hair shaking. I don't know who I am anymore. Jimin crouched in front of him, face soft despite the blood on his hands. You're mine, that's who you are. Jungkook looked up slowly, tears in his eyes. Do you really believe I can come back from this? Jimin smiled sadly. Only if we do it together. Taehyung leaned against the wall, nodding. And not here, this place, it changes you. It wants to keep you. Jin exhaled, finally letting his arms drop. We need to burn it, all of it. Jimin stood, gazing around at the fragments of himself, dead on the floor. I think it's time the mirror saw its own reflection. That night, they flooded the compound with gasoline from the old maintenance closet. Each hallway, each mirror, every lab, Jungkook lit the match. The building went up in seconds, flames devouring decades of lies. Screams echoed in the walls, reflections trapped in the glass as the fire cracked every surface. Jimin didn't look back. As they walked away into the cold night, Jungkook reached for his hand. And for the first time in 3 years, Jimin didn't feel lost. He felt seen. But high above, in the mountains beyond, another set of mirrors reflected the flames. And someone was watching. The fire behind them roared like a wounded god. Red and gold spiraled into the sky, painting the night in violent color. Jungkook didn't look back. Neither did Jimin. The mirror room, the compound, the pain, the illusions, it all collapsed under the weight of truth and flame. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt earned. They drove without speaking for hours, the four of them, Jimin, Jungkook, Jin, and Taehyung, packed into a single car that smelled of ash and sweat. The world outside was unchanged. People laughed in restaurants, neon signs blinked, radio shows played mindlessly, oblivious, safe, or perhaps just asleep. "They'll come for us," Jin said quietly, breaking the silence. "Whoever was behind the compound, they won't let this go." Jimin's voice was low. "Then let them come." Taehyung sat in the back seat with his head against the window, his reflection fractured across the glass. "We exposed their core system, burned their archive. Without the mirror tech, they can't reproduce us anymore. No more copies, no more manipulations." "They still have the originals," Jungkook muttered. Everyone went still. He didn't mean them. He meant the data, the memories, the versions stored not in rooms but in people. The manipulated fans, the loyal staff, the influencers they'd silently built, tailored, and groomed. The world wouldn't believe four idols claiming to have fought their own reflections in an underground lab. They'd be seen as broken, delusional, unstable. And maybe they were. But they were also awake. 2 weeks passed. Jimin lay low in a quiet coastal town. The ocean reminded him of who he used to be, before stages, before cameras, before he was someone else's product. Jungkook stayed with him. At night, they talked, really talked. The kind of conversation you only have when time has collapsed and trust is the only thing holding you together. "I dreamt of them last night," Jungkook said one morning, staring at the tide. "Not the clones, the versions of me I never became. The ones who got to leave, to fall in love, to grow old without a spotlight." Jimin reached over and took his hand. "You're still here. That means something." "Does it?" Jungkook turned to him. "What if I'm still one of them? What if I'm just programmed to think I'm real?" Jimin leaned in, forehead resting against his. Because only someone real would ask that. Jin and Taehyung left Seoul quietly. Jin returned to his parents, living simply, anonymously. He started writing again, songs, yes, but also journals, letters, manifestos. One of them began. "They told us to smile until our faces cracked. And when we broke, they made versions of us that didn't. But we were never made to be perfect. We were made to be alive." Taehyung disappeared into the countryside. His last message to Jimin only 2 words. "No mirrors." And then, one night, Jimin received a package. No return address, no name. Just a black flash drive and a note. For the final reflection. He plugged it into his old laptop, heart racing. A single video file loaded, security footage, recent. A new facility, larger, sleeker, deeper. Rows of incubation chambers. And inside them, versions of other idols. Unmoving, pale, waiting. Beneath the footage, a single line of code pulsed in red. The system never dies. It rebolds. Jimin stared at the screen, felt the familiar chill crawl across his spine. He closed the laptop slowly, then picked up his phone. "Jungkook," he said, "we're not done yet." And this time, they wouldn't be running from the shadows. They'd be setting fire to the whole system. Together,